along the way. Well, I think we're still missing a couple from our side, but hopefully they'll just join in. Okay. Oh, hey, Sarah. Here we got Sarah now. So just while we wait, briefly, the agenda for today is, well, we've got great guest speaker, Dan Delimarsky, who's a PM in the Docs team. And he's going to talk about, well, Docs experiences in general, and more specifically, probably about the API browser. For about 30 minutes, feel free to, go over if you don't worry too much about the, minutes, more or less. Then we'll have a few project updates of the OSS software projects, and then a couple of dates on Docs as well. Okay, now this, I'll just use, sorry, one more sec. Let's go ahead. And then we'll have a quick update on around in-countries activities and Hackadocs and the community updates by Andy, and then a little bit of Q&A if we still have time. So with that, I would say I'll pass it on to Den.
Okay, so I will start presenting. So hopefully I can take over the presentation. Let's see if it works.
Yep.
Okay, so let me know once you actually can see the screen.
Yep, came across.
All right, sweet. So I'll start with a quick introduction. I'm Dan Delimarsky. Like Aldo mentioned, I'm a PM on the Microsoft.com team. We work specifically on building out the documentation experience at Microsoft, and we're talking about any sort of experience: reference, learning, conceptual content, interactive experiences, profiles. And specifically, my area that I'm responsible for is API reference. So this is something that I help drive for docs.microsoft.com all up. So what I wanted to talk about today is briefly show you what we have, what the direction that we're taking with, and of course, give you an opportunity to give some feedback to us. So API ref documentation to docs.microsoft.com approach. So let's start with the what. What do we typically treat as API reference? So API documentation effectively has been known to be shipped by Microsoft for years. This is something that we've introduced through XML files being shipped with libraries that are built in Visual Studio or the C# compiler. We've shipped different offline content that covers Windows APIs. So when we talk about API reference documentation, really is just documentation covering the capabilities and the intricacies of APIs that are spanning every single major platform you can think of. So the examples that I have in this presentation is obviously .NET, Java, Python, Node, TypeScript, REST, but there's more. When we're thinking of languages like Go and Objective-C and Swift and all of that, any sort of API content is what we're talking about here. And this is something that we are very, very passionate at docs.microsoft.com about, making sure that it looks good, it is useful to you, and it provides kind of the most value for your time. The API documentation is almost entirely automatically generated from code. So there is a clear line between what we call in Docs as conceptual content. And this is where we're talking about tutorials, we're talking about any sort of articles that you just have to read. They're human-friendly. They're typically written by a content team. They have plenty of screenshots, videos, interactive content. The API docs are much more rigid. They are the docs that are being created from code. So essentially, we look at code, we take the APIs, and we transform them into docs. There's standard processes for each and every platform that I will talk about later on, but just to give you some context. That said, for that API documentation, it doesn't mean that there's no human touch involved in it at all. So we want to make sure that, like I mentioned earlier, that the API docs are useful. And for that to happen, there needs to be a human that actually adds useful content. So when we augment those API docs, we take input from both code. So if you've written / comments in your code, you know that that can be used to generate documentation. Or in some cases, we have writers that actually go in and actively modify and contribute to API docs. Not to the extent of writing huge articles inside kind of individual API pages, but it's something that helps the user understand what the API does better than what you could just by looking at kind of the skeleton generated from code. So that's kind of the aspect of the what. Now, the why. Why are we so passionate about API docs? Why is that such a big thing for docs.microsoft.com? So one of the areas that we're actively looking into is we want to provide a reliable place to find the latest API information. So what that means is typically, if you look at different libraries, NuGet packages, NPM packages, and if you start looking for documentation, you will often find it scattered around, right? Like there's a bunch of different websites, there's a bunch of different resources, blogs. Some of them are up to date, some of them are not. It's very hard for users to understand when an API doc is actually like, is this recent? Is this good? So for that, we want to make sure that as we build out this experience on docs.microsoft.com, that you're always ending up with the latest and greatest API docs. We want to get full coverage of all API capabilities. So as we document our APIs, we want to be fanatical about making sure that everything that is offered in a NuGet package and an NPM package, Maven package, coming from Python pip, all of that is effectively covered. So you as a user, you as a developer, don't have to guess whether, if I look at this doc, does it show me every single method that this class can carry? Does it show me every single capability of this Azure API? The answer should always be yes. And we want to make sure that you have the best way to get to know the API before using it in a project. So oftentimes, users have doubts about like when they install a package, they're not sure like, is this the right package? Is this the right API that I need to use? Our documentation should help you answer that question. Our documentation should be the one where you look at and say, yep, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is exactly the capability I'm looking for to leverage. And now kind of the how. How do we work with API documentation at docs.microsoft.com? So the kind of big chunk of the workflow is we're actually ingesting source code from public and private repositories. There's SDKs that are open source. There are SDKs that are not open source. We handle both. So we take the source code and we just read it into our build system. We read in all the metadata for each individual platform. So for example, Python has its own documentation generation flow. .NET has its own. Java has its own. We have separate CI jobs that run on the same infrastructure that essentially read in the code and use specific language, very much language-focused approaches to generating the docs. So we're not trying to reinvent how Java doc is generated, as an example. We're using Java doc to kind of provide us that foundational model by which we generate documentation. We also are moving to what's called a package-based model. So we understand that our users, especially when downloading SDKs, you rarely actually go and download the source code, right? The source code is a snapshot in time. So you always have, a range of Git commits. There's, a lot of contributions. It's very hard to track what version am I on, right? So you're never reliant primarily on the source code. As I built my SDK from source. You likely downloaded an SDK or library from NuGet or any other package distribution source. So this is kind of how we want to reflect that into documentation as well. So as we evolve our reference API ref documentation, we want to make sure that you actually see the same package-based model that you see on NuGet.org or on npmjs.org reflected on docs. And what that also means is we introduce support for things like versioning. So now when you download a NuGet package with, say, the latest Azure Key Vault library, as you go on docs to look for specific API documentation, you're always assured that as long as you have the latest version of the package, you also get the latest version of the documentation. For things that are, more in the legacy world, so for example, if you work with .NET Framework 4.5, and you've downloaded, your organization relies on .NET Framework 4.5, you can choose that version as you look at API documentation and not only rely on .NET Framework 4.7.1, which is the latest. Same applies for a lot of different packages in the world of bot framework, Health Vault. You're thinking, Entity Framework, ASP.NET Core. So support for versioning is critical. We understand that a lot of organizations, especially for things that are non-service based, so we also draw the differentiation. There's the service-based libraries where, if you're relying on Azure, right, you are kind of accounting for the service constantly evolving. You have to be on the latest version of the library. Now, if you are using something like .NET Framework, usually it's much more rigid, right? Your organization snaps to a version, and then you ship on that version for a while. We want to give you the flexibility on docs as well. And when we generate the docs for each individual platform, automatically the jobs, the CI jobs, the continuous integration jobs are being ran when new releases happen. So if a new version of a NuGet package comes out, we rerun the documentation generator to get the new docs. If the new .NET framework comes out, we also rerun the generation automatically, and you get the new docs. So the gap between product release and new documentation being launched is being minimized dramatically. This is something that we have not been able to do before. So as we talked about kind of these aspects, how does that translate into the experience on docs.microsoft.com? Because this is our, the moment that we've essentially been waiting for in this presentation is to look at like, well, okay, great. We talked about the theory of it. How does that actually translate into docs? And this is the experience that we've came up, last year, and we launched as .NET as the pilot, but essentially is the API browser. And it follows certain mantra, if you will. It's focused, comprehensive, fast, flexible, and smart. When we talk about focus, this means that it's very much tailored to a platform. So an API browser is an experience, it's a web experience where you can find specific APIs, but we have the caveat here. It's not a search engine in the traditional sense of the word, right? It's like you do not treat it as site search. The API browser is effectively a way for you to look at a platform and say, across all SDKs that Microsoft ships in a specific platform, say .NET or Java or PowerShell, show me an API that I'm looking for. It's comprehensive, and what we mean by that is if we cover a platform like .NET, we want to document every single .NET SDK that Microsoft ships. Whether this is .NET Framework, .NET Core, Health Vault, Entity Framework, anything .NET based shipped by Microsoft should be documented in the .NET API browser. Same applies for PowerShell. If we have the PowerShell API browser, PowerShell module browser, this is where you go to find all API information for all APIs shipped by Microsoft that are foundationally based on PowerShell. Fast. As you search, we don't want you to wait. We want you to make sure that as you look for the API that you have in mind, you get results instantly. This is something where you effectively reduce the wait time. You want to make sure that as you search for specific APIs, the results come up as you type. You don't have to unnecessarily wait until we crawl millions of pages and whatever. It's there. Flexible, and this is what we mean by the ability to provide you the information that you actually want to get when you need it. So if we want to update the APIs with the latest version, for example, the new version of Bot Framework came out. That becomes there almost within a day. Like you don't have to wait, another week of, yes, the new library came out, but then we have to wait for the API browser to pick it up. No, it's there. Like the library launched, the documentation is there. And smart, and this is where we want to evolve it to be to a model where it knows what you're looking for. So if you type in string, it likely knows that you're looking for system string and not string builder. There is a set of rules, there's a set of learning patterns that we want to introduce to make sure that it's something that users love and users see as it learns with them. So to give you an idea of the experience I was talking about, so I'm going to hop on here to Edge, our favorite browser, and this is the .NET API browser. So this is the docs.microsoft.com/.NET/API. Notice that, at a glance, it's just a giant search box. But like I mentioned, it's not a search box in a traditional sense of the word. So if I expand this all API dropdown, this is all the onboarded APIs. So we don't claim yet that we have every single .NET-based API that Microsoft ships in this list. But this list there's a lot of libraries here that I'm sure if you are developing on top of the Microsoft .NET stack, you'll find the most popular libraries here. We have the PowerShell Managed Reference, SQL Server, Test Framework, ASP.NET Core, UWP Community Toolkit, all that information here. So as the user selects any of these, as I say, Azure SDK for .NET, like I mentioned, you can snap to latest version because this is Azure. Azure is service-based. I can also look at .NET Core, and I can select different versions for .NET Core. So in this case, I'm going to do 2.0 latest. Notice the moment I selected the version, instantly I got this list of what is .NET Core about? What kind of APIs does .NET Core have? There's a hierarchy by which we follow. So you notice that the results here are all namespaces because there's a lot of namespaces. We're not really jumping into any other content until the user wants that. So I'm going to type in here, for example, string, right? Instantly, I get the results of what does .NET Core 2.0 has for string. Now, the beautiful part about this .NET browser experience is the fact that I don't have to know what API I'm searching for. So, for example, I have in mind something like Key Vault. I don't know which package it comes in, right? I don't have to select an API, but I search across all onboarded .NET-based APIs. So in this case, Key Vault Test Framework, not exactly what I was looking for, so I can keep scrolling, I can load more results, up until I actually say, right, Key Vault Core is what I was looking for. And that will take you directly to the documentation page for that particular namespace or that particular class or API entity. The API browser experience is also integrated directly into the table of contents. So the search box here is not a filter. It's actually the API browser. So if I type in something like, let's see, password, I get results. I get results like the TOC becomes my little API browser search table. So I see all these results here that allow me to quickly jump to the page, to the documentation page for the API that I was looking for. Again, very handy, and what we've heard is that users like the idea of being able to search APIs from anywhere in the API documentation. Something very similar is available also for PowerShell. So we've launched that fairly recently with the PowerShell module browser. We're the same way. You have the very consistent experience, but you can select different packages, right? So these are, again, we're not claiming that these are all PowerShell-based APIs shipped by Microsoft, but the list here is fairly comprehensive. So we have, say, SQL Server PowerShell, and we'll also snap to latest version. You get all the module information. You get the documentation pages. So if you have, add SQL login. So I myself am not an expert in the SQL Server PowerShell, so I'm just going to use this as an example of something that I'm going to type, again, the search box here, which is the, again, the module browser or the API browser experience for PowerShell. Notice that TOC became, again, the list of results for the PowerShell APIs. This doesn't search .NET. This searches exclusively PowerShell. It's very focused. So back to my point of the PowerShell being a focused experience, this is what you get. You get a very tailored experience to the platform you're working on. Now, let's hop back in. Let's see. Blinking, is there no questions? Any questions? Where's the UWP API? So UWP API is coming. We are working with the UWP team on integrating the UWP API into the experience. So there is some work involved in how they document their stuff. So we're just trying to move them into the the new paradigm. So that's actually happening. We'll keep you posted on when and how. If I would, throw a time frame, I would say, early 2018 is when we'll see the early fruits of that work. So
Dan,
again,
I have another question.
yeah.
I'd like to know, maybe I made a NuGet package and I want to add the documentation to docs. Is there any way to do it?
So today there isn't. So today we do not yet support community package documentation, but we are actively investigating the possibility of that. Because the scenario that you've just described is actually a really good one. We want to make sure that if you have a NuGet package and you ship, for example, a doc.xml file inside it for your library, that is actually rendered somewhere. Now, whether that's going to be a part of NuGet.org, whether that's going to be part of docs, it's TBD, so to be determined. So we are not yet kind of just fully decided on where that's going to be, but that's something definitely on our radar, is something that we're investigating.
And one other question. If I want to make a task-based search, for example, I want to search what is the API to manage packages inside the .NET framework. How could I do it?
So today we do not support that in the API browser because, again, it becomes very tailored. It's effectively IntelliSense in the browser, but we are looking into task-based search in terms of the site search. So this is something that we're investigating on how to implement for the docs-wide search. For example, if you type in, how do I reset password Windows 10? We actually are inferring your intent versus just doing full text search on the articles.
Okay, thanks.
That will happen for search. We're looking at how to do that, not specifically for the API browser at this time. Okay, so like I mentioned for the API browser, every platform has its focus view, and like what you saw with .NET and PowerShell, we have very much individual API browser instances for each platform. We have one for JavaScript coming. We're investigating the one for Python that will be there as well. Because every platform has its own way of structuring and organizing API entities. The namespace in .NET is not the same as a namespace in Python. Commandlet in PowerShell is not a concept that you get in .NET API. So those are not interchangeable. That's why we kind of siloed them as their own, very much tailored focus experience. But with that being said, every experience is consistent with the baseline. So this is where looking at the capabilities of the API browser, looking at how it looks and how it works, it's the same. You can select APIs and packages the same way you can in .NET as you can in PowerShell, and the same way you will be able to do in JavaScript. It's not something that we want our users to think about. If you are learning TypeScript, for example, and you go to the JavaScript API browser, you see those results the same way as you would see them for .NET. You don't have to think about, this is a new product, this works differently. No, it's exactly the same product. It's just tailored to a different language. One format. So for all the reference, I showed you some of the documentation, but with the API browser, we've also working on standardizing how we present our reference documentation. And this is the way we formalize the presentation of code, the way we formalize the presentation of APIs. We want to make sure that it's consistent. So what I just talked about, kind of the baseline experience for API browser being the same for all API browsers, we want to do the same for your API docs. If you go to JavaScript docs, if you go to Node docs, Java docs, all of it looks very much in a docs standard format, on a docs ready format. This means that you don't go to the .NET framework documentation and you see a sandcastle generated, sandcastle looking site. And then you go to the Java documentation and you see a Java doc experience. No, you see the docs.microsoft.com experience. It's always consistent. While we use different tools to generate the content, we are always presenting it to you in a way that is familiar, in a way that is consistent, and in a way that is actually useful. With that in mind, kind of as we think for what can we do for our community in the future, we want to unify how contributions are made. So today we have a large split in the between the world of conceptual content, and this is tutorials, AD articles where you edit Markdown, and then you have reference documentation, where for certain things you have to go to the Swagger files. For certain things you have to go to the source code and to edit those files. There's a lot of work involved, and there's a lot of thinking about how do I contribute to specific docs if, for example, I'm not an expert in that area. I myself, for example, don't code in Java. I don't know what the Java doc requirements are. I don't know what the Java doc intricacies are and what the considerations are. But I do know Markdown. So Markdown, Markdown, Markdown. We want to make sure that as we standardize community contributions, as long as you know Markdown, you can contribute to our docs. You can contribute to them. You don't need to know whether it's Java-based, .NET-based, Node.js-based. As long as you know Markdown, you can contribute to our docs. And that's kind of the mantra that we'll be moving forward with. And there's going to be a lot of work done in terms of unification and making sure that we're actually building the right tools and the right infrastructure and that they're integrated the right way. But consistency and all around community contributions and Markdown. So kind of to give you a general heads up. For any other questions after our sessions, because I see that I'm running out of time, feel free to ping me on Twitter at DennisCode, or you can also ping our Docs MSFT account. So just tag us on Twitter. If you have any questions, suggestions, ideas, we're always listening. We're always eager to hear your feedback, and we are very much grateful for the opportunity to kind of talk to you. Thank you. And I'll leave, 2-3 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Dan.
Any?
Anyone? Other questions? Actually, I have one. The reference is completely auto-generated, no manual additions or.
So the reference, there are some manual additions, but the manual additions are very surgical. So if you think like the majority of it, the skeleton is generated from code, right? So the stubs for APIs, like what methods, classes, descriptions, a lot of them are also generated from code in terms that the product teams or the developers are building in comments into their code. So we're ingesting those comments and we're presenting them on docs. So they're developer comments. Now, for things like .NET Framework, as an example, there are no, or .NET Core, if you look online at the open source version of it on GitHub, there's not a lot of / comments. So we don't ingest those. Those are actually handwritten. So it depends. For the majority of it, like I mentioned, human contributions are very surgical. Like somebody can come in and modify the description for a method. They will not be able to fully document the API signature for, a generic class. They're very much focused and minor.
Yeah. And so how do you manage that with the frequent updates? Say a new version of the .NET API, .NET Core APIs comes out, you have tasks running that can import them and publish them quickly. So you always on Docs, you always have the latest and greatest version. But anything that requires manual, say a new parameter is updated to a method, you will see it, but you'll probably get or to begin with, at least, you'll just get what the / comments you have in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where, we have an awesome team of technical writers that work on these, high volume products. So for things like .NET Framework, .NET Core, there's a huge amount of APIs to be documented. So they work constantly to kind of make sure that there's no gaps. For other libraries, typically, if we look at Azure is very much driven by / comments. So a lot of community contributions, there's not a lot of APIs that you will go to and they have nothing in them. So if something changes, we ingest the / comments that are shipped in the .xml file in the NuGet package, and we just take that and transform it in a doc-friendly format and we just present it to the user. So there is almost never a case when is just empty and nobody bothered to add some documentation for a specific method or class, other than cases when that was actually not documented in code. So if you see something that's not documented in docs.microsoft.com, likely it was not documented in code.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and hopefully you expect this kind of the same discipline from the Python community or the Java community with their own. Of course.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else? Or Thomas is writing.
I have one question. So say, for example, if I'm using currently .NET 4.5 and then I want to migrate to .NET 4.7.2 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So do the current API docs show me kind of what is the difference from the previous version to the current version? What are the methods or even methods that get deprecated, methods that changed and all that? Is that generated programmatically, or is it somebody who has to specifically write that if that is required?
So generally for these kind of big switches, they're introducing a lot of changes. There's somebody that actually goes in and obviously they have an output of the tooling that tells you, here's the methods that were deprecated, here's the namespace is no longer available, and so on. For the most part, however, when we do API version selection on docs, you see what there is for that specific API, because we don't know your intent. We don't know whether you just want to see the content for this particular version or you want to see the difference between, say, 4.7.1 and 4.5. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com, you select .NET Framework 4.5 and you switch from 4.7.1, we will hide stuff that's not available. For example, that was removed or deprecated in 4.7.1 that was in 4.5. So that will just disappear from the page. You won't get any kind of in-page cues that says, hey, and by the way, this method foo is no longer available. You will just not see method foo.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, thoughts? Okay. Well, like I mentioned, do tag us on Twitter if you have any other questions, suggestions, or ideas. We also have a user voice site that you can go to once you go to our Twitter page. We handily provide a link there. So make sure to keep us in the loop with any sort of feedback. Like I said, we're always happy to talk to the community.
Super. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks. Feel free to stay or drop as you like. We'll just continue with Daniel for a quick update on the Visual Studio Code project.
Okay, this is Daniel Yi. I'm in charge of Visual Studio Community Localization project. So again, thank you very much for your contribution. We had another very good month. So we released, this should be October update. We released that last Wednesday, I believe. Then we have a better contribution rate from community, and we have recognized all the contributors in release notes. You can find in the online release notes. Also, you can find in VS Code software from help release notes menu. So project facts. So basically, we have 4,000 strings, source string, and 30,000 source word. We now have over 500 community members. Every month we have 30 to actually last month was like 60 active community members contributed. We now have 23 language enabled. We enabled Tamil last month. For next release, we don't have schedule at this moment. We are waiting for VS Code team to publish the iteration plan. The traditional release cycle basically is monthly, so I'm not sure at this moment if we are going to continue the monthly release because it's a holiday season, but we'll wait and see. Thank you. That's all for VS Code.
Thank you, Daniel. Any question on this one, anyone? And thanks again to all the contributors. Yeah, thanks. Mona, a quick update on the SQL tools on Linux projects. Yeah. Hey.
Hi, everyone. I'm the PM for SQL tools on Linux, and I would like to start with thanking everybody for their contributions. And last week we have released the version the update 1.2.1, and that didn't have any log changes. And the release was to align with some VS Code release that Daniel mentioned last week. So we have a plan to do a refresher with the localization update. I would expect that sometimes next week. And we currently 100% localized for majority of the language except Chinese traditional and Russian. We still need more community contribution. So we encourage everybody to go and check it out and either vote for translation or provide new translation. And that's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mona. Sorry, one. Praveen, quick update on Team Explorer.
Hi, everyone. For Team Explorer Everywhere, we are 100% complete on all languages that we release Team Explorer Everywhere. So currently, the core team is actually working with the open source community on features for the next release. So once that is confirmed, we will know what the release plan is from the core team. So once that is available, I'll update that in the TEE team page in GitHub. So currently, there is no release schedule. It is still to be determined. That's all for Explorer. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Praveen. Next is a quick update from Microsoft Docs. Andy, you want to go? Or
yeah,
Sarah?
I'll take it. So first, I quickly want to say thank you for the guys everybody has been contributing to the software projects. If you're working in the languages that I am kind of following, I am the one bothering you and asking you to do it. So thank you for responding. We're at 100%. And quickly just shifting to Docs. So every month we're doing this is a pretty big effort, as you heard Dan talk about it. We're adding features, we're adding things to Docs. This is our should be the first and only stop when you look at documentation. So some of the efforts we're doing here for international, this is what we did last month, and go ahead and check it out. This is all brand new stuff. It'll give you an update on all the different languages that we're shipping. So next one.
Yep.
And I wanted to talk a little bit on some of the things that we're doing for Docs. Like I said, Docs it's a really big deal. We're doing these things called community hackadocs, and essentially what this is we do a focused effort with the community, and we work together with them so that they can help us review and improve a specific section of the documentation in docs@microsoft.com. In particularly, what I'm showing you is the effort that we did last month for Brazilian Portuguese. It's been quite successful so far. We've been pushing it a lot and working very closely with that community. As you can see, we've done almost 100 suggestions that have been put into the system through GitHub and the Docs platform. 97 of them are linguistic, which means the community has actually gone in there and improved the language of the documents. That's pretty awesome because you're seeing the results right away, and you're seeing the experts, the community experts, go out there and improve the documents. And we're working together as a team to improve all that. We're also doing it in different languages. So what I would say is, look at our wiki pages, look at our social announcements, because we do have this program running through a handful of international languages. Some of the things that we're doing, as you can see, we pull statistics. We're also doing a leaderboard to recognize who our top community members are. So like I said, keep an eye out for the opportunities, and we love to have you helping out in community for the hackathons. Next slide. So quickly on the community updates, this is pretty cool. So I've been talking. I've said it a couple of times about keeping an eye on our social and wiki sites. But something we did last month, we were really lucky to be able to meet some of our community members through this past summit in Seattle. So that was really cool. We had Marcus, we had Roberto, we had some other community members show up. So it's really good to, as we come up through these conferences or events, we'll try to be there if we have some sort of local presence, or if you guys are coming to Seattle. We'd love to meet with you guys so you can meet our team. We'll give you an idea of what some of the cool projects that we're doing. We want to be able to thank you and recognize the work that you're doing. So this was a really cool opportunity, and it was awesome to be able to meet you guys and take some photos with you and put them on social and all that good stuff. Is that, and I think that's it. Oh, don't forget, we have a survey. There's a link to it where we want to get feedback from you guys. We want to be able to continue to improve this call, come up with good speakers, get a good feel of whether this is being useful to you. So don't forget at the end of the call to hit the link and respond to the survey. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Andy. Sorry, let me retype in here. Bitly. Thank you very much, Andy, and everyone, and all the PMs involved. Any question? Or feedback? Anything you want to see or hear, in the next call? Well, if not now, just feel free to let us know. You've seen, and from the wiki page, you know what those channels, for communication are. If you don't have our emails, I guess. If nothing else, I guess we'll just save 15 minutes for everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day or evening.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.